The evening was warm when students began gathering inside the dojo. The wooden floors shone under the lights, and the faint smell of polished mats filled the air. Some students were stretching in the corner, others were tying their belts neatly, preparing for another day of training. The dojo was always filled with a mix of excitement and discipline. People came not only to learn self-defense but also to test their limits and discover their strength. Among the students was a man who already wore a black belt around his waist. He had trained for years, and his confidence showed in the way he moved and carried himself. He was strong, skilled, and respected, but at the same time, he had a playful side. He enjoyed showing off his skills, sometimes teasing other students, not out of cruelty, but because he thought it was fun. Many laughed along with him because they knew he didn't mean any harm. On this day, however, someone new stood quietly at the back of the dojo. She was a woman of calm presence, dressed in a white uniform like everyone else. Her belt was not black, but she moved with quiet confidence. Her eyes were sharp yet gentle, and she did not speak much. She seemed like the kind of person who carried her strength on the inside, not on the outside. She tied her hair back, tightened her belt, and waited patiently for the class to begin. The black belt noticed her. He smiled, thinking she was just another beginner who might struggle with the techniques. To him, she looked humble and soft-spoken, and in his mind, that meant she would probably not be much of a challenge. He leaned toward another student and whispered something, making them both laugh softly. It was clear that he thought he had already measured her without even seeing her move. The instructor walked in, and the class bowed in respect. The session began with warm ups, stretching, and practicing simple drills. The black belt performed every move with flair, adding a little extra snap to his kicks and speed to his punches. The woman, on the other hand, moved quietly, focusing on precision rather than display. She did not seem to care about showing off. Her movements were smooth, controlled, and calm, like water flowing in a steady stream. As the class moved into partner exercises, the black belt decided he wanted to pair up with her. He thought it would be amusing to see how she handled his strength. "Come on, let's train together," he said with a grin. She nodded politely, accepting without hesitation. At first, they practiced basic blocks and strikes. He threw punches slowly, testing her reactions, and she blocked each one with surprising ease. Her hands were quick and steady, never flinching. He raised his eyebrows, slightly impressed but still convinced he could outmatch her anytime. To him, it was still just a light exercise. After a few minutes, he decided to play a little joke. Without warning, he slipped behind her and wrapped his arm loosely around her neck in a playful choke hold. It wasn't meant to hurt her, just to make others laugh and show how easily he could control the situation. Some students nearby chuckled, thinking it was harmless. But the woman did not panic. She didn't struggle or shout. She simply stood there, her breathing calm, her body relaxed. Her stillness caught him by surprise. He expected her to flail or pull away, but instead, she seemed completely composed, almost as if she had been in this position many times before. The class watched closely, curious about what she would do next. There was something about her silence that made people lean in, sensing that the story was not going to end the way the black belt imagined. The man smiled wider, tightening his grip just a little, still playful. He wanted to see some reaction from her. But instead of fear, he saw something else in her eyes: patience. She wasn't scared. She wasn't helpless. She was waiting. In that moment, the dojo atmosphere shifted. What started as a small joke was beginning to feel like the opening of a lesson that no one expected. The wooden floor creaked as the students shifted on their feet, watching in silence. The instructor, too, paused to observe, curious to see how the situation would unfold. The woman slowly raised her hands, not in panic but with precision, as if she was about to begin a technique. The black belt felt a small chill of uncertainty, though he didn't want to show it. He still believed he had control, but something inside him whispered that he might have underestimated her. Her calmness was unusual. Most people would laugh nervously, struggle, or at least look uncomfortable when caught off guard. But she looked like she was exactly where she needed to be, like she had trained for this very situation many times in her life. The students began exchanging glances, sensing that the joke might turn into something more serious, though still within the safe, respectful boundaries of the dojo. The black belt's playful grin remained, but inside he was curious. Why isn't she moving, he thought. He gave a little tug, as if to remind her that he was in charge. But still, her body was steady, her breath calm, her eyes focused. It was in that silence that the seeds of surprise were planted. No one knew exactly what was coming next, but everyone could feel it. This was no ordinary student. This was someone who carried strength differently, not by showing off, not by raising her voice, but by waiting for the right moment. And that moment was only seconds away. The dojo was quiet, except for the sound of bare feet moving lightly across the polished floor. Everyone was watching the two of them, the black belt who carried himself like a champion, and the woman who stood calm and silent, her expression steady. The playful joke that had started as a small joke was now something different. The man thought it was just harmless fun, a way to show his strength and maybe make the class laugh. He didn't imagine that it would turn into a lesson that he himself would never forget. The woman's eyes remained calm, not a single sign of panic. Her breathing was even, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't try to pull his arm away, nor did she cry out for help. Instead, she waited as though she knew exactly how long she needed to hold her silence before making her move. To the black belt, this was unusual. Most beginners would have been startled or embarrassed. Some might have laughed nervously, others would have tried to break free with clumsy movements. But this woman was still, almost too still. He thought maybe she froze because she didn't know what to do. In his mind, that made him feel even more in control. See? Easy, he muttered under his breath, smiling proudly. But while he thought he was proving his point, he didn't realize he was the one being studied. The woman was observing every detail of his stance, the pressure of his hold, the way his weight shifted when he leaned against her. She was not scared. She was calculating. The students around them began to sense the shift. At first, they chuckled along, thinking it was just playful practice. But the longer she stayed calm, the more curious they became. Her silence was powerful, almost unsettling. It was as though she was quietly waiting for the perfect time to answer. The instructor, standing at the front, did not step in. He knew something about this woman that the others didn't. He had seen her train before, had seen her patience and her precision. He wanted the rest of the class to learn the lesson too. So, instead of stopping them, he simply folded his arms and watched closely. The black belt adjusted his grip, trying to push her a little further, expecting at least some struggle. But still, she didn't fight back. "What's wrong?" "Can't move," he teased lightly, his tone playful but confident. Inside, though, he was puzzled. Why wasn't she reacting? Why wasn't she flinching or trying to break free? The truth was, she didn't need to rush. She understood something he did not. In martial arts, calmness often defeats recklessness. She was saving her energy, waiting for him to create the very opening she needed. Finally, the moment came. As he shifted his stance to tighten his hold, she felt the change in his balance. His weight leaned just a little too much to one side. In that split second, her eyes flickered with awareness. She knew it was time. Her body moved with precision, not aggression. She lowered her weight, turned slightly, and with one swift motion, she began to reverse the position. The entire class gasped softly as they saw her hands move expertly, guiding his arm away instead of fighting it directly. In one smooth step, she had broken free. The black belt's eyes widened in shock. "Wait, what?" he muttered under his breath. He tried to regain control, but before he could react, she stepped to the side and shifted her grip, using his own momentum against him. It was so fast that many in the room barely saw it happen. And then, the unbelievable happened. In a matter of seconds, the man who had been in control now found himself in the opposite position. The woman had secured him with a clean, controlled hold, one that he could not escape from easily. His playful grin disappeared, replaced with surprise, then discomfort. The class was silent. No one laughed now. Everyone watched with wide eyes as the black belt struggled slightly, only to realize the more he resisted, the tighter her control became. The woman did not smile, did not gloat. Her face remained calm, her movements precise. She wasn't trying to hurt him. She was simply showing him, and everyone else, that she was not the weak opponent he thought she was. "Do you want me to let go?" she asked softly, her voice steady. The black belt swallowed, his pride stung. For the first time in a long while, he felt powerless. He had underestimated her completely, assuming she was just another student who didn't know much. But in reality, she had mastered techniques that even he, with all his confidence, had overlooked. "Yes," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. She released him at once and stepped back politely. She even bowed slightly, showing respect despite what just happened. That simple gesture made the lesson even more powerful. She hadn't humiliated him, she had reminded him what true martial arts meant. The room filled with murmurs of surprise. Students whispered to each other, replaying the moment in their minds. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled with admiration. The black belt rubbed his arm and looked at her with new eyes. It wasn't anger he felt. It was something deeper: humility. He realized that he had judged her too quickly, letting his pride guide his actions instead of his discipline. And now, in front of everyone, he had learned the cost of underestimating someone who carried quiet strength. The instructor finally stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This," he said, pointing toward the woman, "is why we never judge an opponent by what we see on the outside. True strength is not always loud. True skill does not need to boast. Remember this." The students nodded, the words sinking in. The black belt lowered his head slightly, acknowledging the truth of the lesson. He may have been embarrassed, but deep down, he knew he had gained something more valuable than pride: respect for another's skill and a reminder of the humility every martial artist should carry. As for the woman, she simply walked back to her place in the line, calm as ever. To her, it was not about proving herself, nor about defeating him. It was simply about showing what she had learned through years of quiet training, that discipline, patience, and respect are the real marks of strength. The dojo was never quite the same after that day. Every student who witnessed the scene carried the memory with them. They learned not to underestimate, not to assume, and above all, not to let pride blind them. The black belt, too, would never forget. In those few seconds, he had gone from laughing to struggling, from playful confidence to humbled respect. And though it stung at first, he realized it was exactly the kind of lesson that would make him a better martial artist and a better person. That day was not about defeat. It was about discovery. And everyone who stood in that dojo discovered something new: strength is not about who looks the toughest. It is about who carries calmness, respect, and control even when underestimated. The dojo felt different now. The air that once carried laughter and light teasing had shifted into a quiet tension. Everyone had seen what just happened. A woman who looked calm and gentle had just surprised the most confident student in the room. The black belt, who was usually the one teaching others lessons through playful demonstrations, had found himself on the receiving end of a technique he hadn't expected. He shook his arms lightly, as though to brush off the moment. but his pride still stung. The students' eyes were on him, some wide with amazement, others curious to see what would happen next. Would he laugh it off? Would he try again? Or would he admit that he had been wrong? The woman, meanwhile, returned to her position, as calm as before. She did not brag, did not smile with victory. Her expression showed only respect for the art she practiced. To her, it was never about defeating anyone, it was about showing skill and maintaining balance between strength and humility. But for the black belt, the story wasn't over yet. He wasn't used to being caught off guard, especially in front of others. He stepped forward again, his eyes studying her more carefully this time. He realized now that she was no ordinary student. There was something in the way she moved, too controlled, too deliberate, that told him she had trained far more than he had assumed. "All right," he said with a faint smile, trying to sound relaxed. "Let's try something else." The instructor watched quietly. He didn't intervene, because he wanted this to play out. He knew there was a valuable lesson hidden in the moment, a lesson not only for the black belt but for the entire class. They bowed to each other again, the way martial artists always do before a spar. This time, the black belt wasn't careless. He approached her with more caution, circling slowly, waiting to see how she would respond. The class leaned forward slightly, their curiosity growing. He struck first, a quick but controlled move, testing her speed. She blocked smoothly, her hands steady, her body balanced. He tried again with another strike, a little faster, but once more, she deflected it as though it were nothing. There was no panic in her movements, no rush. She seemed to flow like water, adjusting to every motion with ease. The black belt began to realize something unsettling. He had strength, speed, and confidence, but she had timing. And timing, in martial arts, often mattered more than power. Trying to break her rhythm, he moved quickly and tried to grab her arm. But the moment he reached out, she stepped aside with perfect timing. He stumbled forward slightly, surprised by how easily she had avoided his grip. It wasn't that she was faster, it was that she knew exactly when to move. The students gasped softly. They had never seen anyone handle the black belt this way. He was skilled, yes, but she seemed to be reading him like an open book. Annoyed but determined, he decided to test her with something more challenging. He tried a sweeping motion, a move that usually forced opponents off balance. But before the sweep could even touch her, she shifted her weight and countered with a graceful motion of her own. In a blink, she had reversed his move, and suddenly, he was the one who had lost balance. His heart raced. He realized then that he was no longer playing a game. This was not fun anymore. This was serious, and he was the one being taught a lesson. The unexpected turn came quickly. In one swift motion, she moved behind him, guiding his arm the way he had once guided hers. The black belt felt his body pulled into a position he could not escape. His eyes widened in shock. Just moments ago, he had been confident and in control. Now, he was trapped, unable to move without causing himself more discomfort. The dojo fell silent again. No one spoke. No one laughed. All eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding before them. The black belt felt the pressure of her hold, not painful but firm enough to remind him that he could not escape. His pride crumbled as he realized the truth: he had been completely outmatched. And it had happened so quickly that he didn't even know how she managed it. His breathing grew heavier, not from pain but from the weight of realization. The very woman he thought was weak had turned the tables on him. In that moment, he understood the power of calmness, patience, and skill. "Tap," the instructor finally said gently, signaling him to yield. Reluctantly, the black belt tapped the floor with his hand, admitting defeat. The woman released him instantly, stepping back with the same respect as before. She bowed again, her calm expression unchanged. The class was stunned. Some students clapped quietly, others whispered to each other in amazement. The black belt stood up slowly, his face red with embarrassment but also with newfound respect. For the first time in years, he felt what it was like to be humbled in front of others. It wasn't easy, but deep inside, he knew it was necessary. He had grown too comfortable, too sure of himself. And sometimes, the only way to learn humility is through experience. The instructor smiled faintly. "Do you all see what just happened?" he asked the class. The students nodded eagerly. "Strength is important," the instructor continued. "But strength without humility is empty. Speed is powerful, but timing is wiser. And confidence is useful until it blinds you. What you saw today is the true meaning of martial arts. It is not about showing off. It is about respect, balance, and control." The black belt lowered his head. "Yes, sensei," he said softly, acknowledging the lesson. The woman, still silent, returned to her place. To her, this was not about victory. She wasn't there to embarrass him. She was simply practicing what she had learned to defend, to control, and to respect. The unexpected turn had shaken the entire dojo. Every student knew they would remember this day, not because of the black belt's loss, but because of the powerful reminder that appearances could be deceiving. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes, it is quiet, waiting patiently until the right moment. The dojo was still buzzing with the surprise of what had just happened. Students exchanged glances, some smiling, others shaking their heads in disbelief. For many of them, this was the first time they had seen the confident black belt humbled so quickly and so completely. The moment had left a mark, not only on him but on everyone who witnessed it. The black belt stood in the center, catching his breath. His pride, once so high, now felt heavy. He had always been the one others looked up to, the one who showed skill and control. But today, he had been outmatched by someone he had thought of as quiet and unthreatening. That thought alone made his cheeks warm with embarrassment. But what surprised him more than the defeat itself was how she handled it. The woman didn't smile at his loss. She didn't gloat, didn't raise her head in triumph. Instead, she bowed respectfully, showing him the same courtesy she had shown at the beginning. She treated him not as an opponent to defeat, but as a partner in practice. That single gesture carried more weight than any technique. He realized then that this was not about winning or losing. It was about respect. The instructor finally stepped forward, his eyes moving from the woman to the black belt. His voice was calm but firm, the kind of tone that carried wisdom. "Martial arts is not a game," he said, looking at the students. "It is not about showing who is stronger, or who can embarrass the other. It is about discipline, humility, and respect. You saw what happened today. A lesson was taught, but not through pride, through control and balance." The students nodded, listening carefully. The room was silent except for the voice of the instructor. The black belt lowered his head. "Sensei, I understand," he said quietly. His voice was softer than before, no longer filled with the usual confidence. The woman simply bowed again, acknowledging the instructor's words. Her calmness was like a mirror, reflecting what martial arts was truly meant to be. She wasn't there to humiliate anyone. She was there to practice respect, to keep control even when given the chance to boast. The instructor smiled gently. "That is why strength without respect is empty. True mastery is not in how hard you can strike, but in how much control you can show." The lesson sank deep into the black belt's heart. He realized that his playful choke earlier had been careless, even disrespectful. He thought it was fun, but in truth, it had been an act of arrogance. He had forgotten the very first lessons he had once been taught when he was a beginner, that martial arts is about honor, not ego. After class ended, the students gathered their belongings, but the whispers continued. Everyone was talking about the woman, about how she had turned the situation around so gracefully. Some admired her technique, others admired her patience. But all of them understood one thing: respect was more powerful than strength alone. The black belt, still humbled, approached her quietly. He hesitated for a moment, then bowed deeply. "Thank you," he said sincerely. She tilted her head slightly, almost surprised. "For what?" "For reminding me what this really means," he answered. His voice carried no pride now, only gratitude. "I thought I was teaching you, but today you taught me." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes remained calm. "We all learn from each other," she replied softly. "That is the way of training. No one is above the other." Those words stayed with him. He had always thought of himself as someone others should follow. But now, he realized that even someone who seemed quiet and unnoticed could carry lessons stronger than any black belt. The next day, the dojo felt different. The black belt was no longer strutting with overconfidence. Instead, he trained with humility, treating every partner with genuine respect. When he practiced with the woman again, he no longer tried to play games or show off. Instead, he focused on learning, watching carefully how she moved, trying to understand the depth of her control. The other students noticed the change. They too became more careful with their words and actions, remembering the power of humility. The dojo became not just a place of practice but a place of growth of skill, yes, but also growth of character. Weeks passed, and the story of that day became part of the dojo's memory. New students who joined later often heard about the day the black belt was humbled. But whenever the story was told, it was not spoken with mockery. It was shared with respect, as a reminder of what martial arts truly meant. The black belt himself never denied the story. In fact, he began to tell it proudly, not as a tale of his defeat, but as a lesson that changed him. "That day," he would say, "was the day I understood what respect really means." And every time he said those words, he looked at the woman with genuine gratitude. She had never tried to make him small. She had only reminded him of the greatness of humility. The dojo thrived because of that lesson. The students trained harder, but also treated each other with more kindness. They learned that skill without respect was empty, but respect with skill created something unbreakable. For the black belt, the greatest victory came not from his past matches, but from this one moment of humility. He realized that respect was the strongest force of all. Stronger than muscles, faster than kicks, deeper than pride. Respect was what gave meaning to everything they practiced on those wooden floors. The woman continued training as usual, never asking for attention, never trying to stand in the spotlight. She didn't need to. Her actions had spoken louder than any words. She had shown everyone that the heart of martial arts was not about domination, but about understanding, respect, and balance. And so, the lesson lived on. Every time students bowed to each other before practice, they remembered why they did it. Every time they trained, they carried a little more humility. And every time they walked out of the dojo, they carried not just stronger bodies, but stronger spirits. The dojo had changed ever since that unforgettable day. The moment when the black belt was humbled by the quiet woman became more than just a memory, it became a turning point for everyone. The atmosphere was no longer filled with playful arrogance or showmanship. Instead, it was filled with something deeper: respect, patience, and a renewed sense of discipline. The black belt, once known for his confidence and teasing spirit, carried himself differently now. He still had skill, still had power, but the way he used it had changed. He no longer tried to prove himself in every match. He no longer laughed at beginners or underestimated them. Instead, he treated every student, no matter their rank, with the same level of seriousness and respect. For him, this was a new beginning. He often thought about that moment when he was forced to tap, the moment when his pride gave way to humility. At first, it had been embarrassing. But with time, he realized it was one of the greatest gifts he had ever received. Without that lesson, he might have continued down a path of arrogance, forgetting the true meaning of martial arts. The woman, meanwhile, continued to train quietly. She never sought attention for what she had done. She never reminded him of that day, never used it as a way to elevate herself. To her, it was simply another practice, another chance to apply the lessons she had learned through years of discipline. But even in her silence, she had become an example to everyone in the dojo. The younger students began to admire her. They watched the way she carried herself calm, focused, and respectful, and they tried to follow her example. Even those who had once looked up only to the black belt now found themselves learning from her quiet strength. She never asked for followers, but her actions naturally inspired them. The instructor noticed the change too. He often spoke about that day in his lessons. Martial arts is not about who wins or loses, he would remind them. It is about who learns and grows. Every mistake is a lesson, every defeat is a teacher. That is why we bow not only to show respect to others, but also to show respect to the lessons we are about to learn. The black belt listened to these words carefully. He no longer felt ashamed of his experience. Instead, he felt grateful. He understood now that every martial artist, no matter how skilled, always had more to learn. And sometimes, the greatest lessons came from the most unexpected places. Weeks turned into months, and the dojo grew stronger, not just in skill but in spirit. The students encouraged each other instead of competing with arrogance. They trained harder, but they also supported one another. The story of the quiet woman and the humbled black belt became part of the dojo's tradition, told to new students so they would understand the importance of respect from the very beginning. For the black belt, his new beginning stretched beyond the dojo walls. In his daily life, he found himself practicing more patience. He spoke more kindly to others, listened more carefully, and treated people with more humility. What he had learned on the mats became a part of how he lived outside them. He realized that martial arts was not just about fighting techniques, it was a way of life, shaping the heart as much as the body. The woman also continued her journey. She trained with quiet dedication, but she also began teaching some of the younger students who admired her calmness. She never raised her voice, never commanded attention, but her presence alone gave others confidence. Under her guidance, they learned that strength was not about force, but about control and understanding. One evening, after a long class, the black belt approached her again. He bowed deeply, as he always did now, and said, "I want to thank you once more. That day changed me." She smiled softly. "It changed all of us," she replied. Her words were true. That day had not only humbled him, but it had reminded the entire dojo of what martial arts was truly about. Everyone who witnessed it carried the lesson in their hearts: never underestimate others, never let pride cloud your vision, and always practice respect. Over time, the black belt and the woman became partners in training. They sparred often, not as rivals but as equals. He no longer saw her as someone weaker than him. He saw her as someone who had taught him one of the most important lessons of his life. And she, in turn, respected his willingness to change and grow. Their partnership inspired the rest of the dojo. Students saw that martial arts was not about hierarchy or ego, it was about mutual growth. Two people, no matter their rank or background, could teach and learn from each other. That idea became the heart of their training. Years later, when new students entered the dojo, the instructor would still tell the story of that day. He would describe how the black belt had once underestimated someone and how he had learned humility in the most unexpected way. The new students would listen with wide eyes, realizing that respect was not just a word but a way of living. The black belt himself often shared his own perspective. "That moment," he would say, "was not my defeat. It was my beginning." It was the day I learned that the true power of martial arts is not in showing off, but in showing respect. The woman never interrupted or corrected him. She simply bowed whenever he shared the story, letting his words carry the lesson forward. She understood that the real victory was not in what happened on the mats, but in how it had changed him and everyone else. And so, the dojo flourished. It became more than a place to learn kicks and punches. It became a community built on discipline, humility, and respect. The students trained with intensity, but they also trained with kindness. They competed, but they also encouraged each other. They grew stronger, not only in body but also in spirit. For the black belt, life outside the dojo also reflected this change. He treated his family with more patience, his friends with more loyalty, and strangers with more kindness. He realized that respect was not something you practiced only on the mats, it was something you carried everywhere. The woman remained the quiet force in the background, always steady, always humble. She never sought recognition, but she received it anyway, through the respect of everyone around her. She had shown that true power was not about being loud or demanding attention. True power was about being calm, patient, and respectful, no matter the situation. And so, the story had come full circle. What began as a playful act in the dojo had turned into a powerful lesson. A man who once underestimated had become a man who respected. A woman who was once overlooked had become an example for all. Together, they had shown that the greatest victories in life are not about defeating others, but about defeating our own pride. The dojo carried on with this spirit, year after year. Every bow, every spar, every practice session carried the weight of that lesson. Respect was no longer just part of the rules, it was the heart of everything they did.